In view of this argument, we should not be surprised that Leibniz makes clear in a number of his writings that he believed that a pure love of God above all things is a sufficient condition of supreme and eternal happiness or blessedness. I believe indeed that he regarded that as a truth of reason with which truths of faith must be in conformity. He was less ready to say that a pure love of God is also a necessary condition of supreme blessedness, but I think he believed that too, and he did say something theologically akin to that in a set of notes written in the mid-1680s, to wit, "No one can be justified without a true love for God." This line of thought is not without its problems for Leibniz. In particular, he confronted questions about the theological orthodoxy that a pure love for God above all things is sufficient for blessedness now and in eternity. The problem and Leibniz's view about it are clearly articulated relatively early in his career in a dialogue that he wrote in 1679 for Duke Johann Friedrich of Hanover. The dialogue is thought to be a lightly fictionalized version of conversations that actually took place between Leibniz, represented in the dialogue by Theophile, a Lutheran, and Nicolaus Steno, the Roman Catholic apostolic vicar at the court of Hanover, represented by Polyander. Theophile introduces the topic with his thesis. This is long quote 13. Several back and forths. Theophile's thesis: "You'll agree that those who love God above all things are in a condition to be saved. The problem is voiced by Polyander. A pagan philosopher can love God above all things, since reason can teach him that God is a being infinitely perfect and supremely lovable. But he will not be a Christian for all that, for perhaps he will not have heard tell of Jesus Christ, without whom there is no salvation. Therefore, love of God is not enough." Theophile replies ironically, suggesting that the sufficiency of love for God can be reconciled with the necessity of knowing Christ, in accordance with the thought of several learned and pious theologians who believe that God enlightens all those who seek him sincerely, at least at the point of death, by revealing to them, even internally, what they need to know of Jesus Christ. Theophile adds that this follows that incontestable rule that God does not refuse his grace to those who do what depends on them. Polyander finds this resolution of the matter agreeable and changes the subject. The problem receives essentially the same discussion 31 years later in the Theodicy, sections 95 to 98. And similar treatments of the issue of the salvation of non-Christians occur fairly often in Leibniz's writings. It is clear that Leibniz cared deeply about the issue. He expressed himself with biting bluntness unusual for him in a letter of 1690 to his Roman Catholic friend, Count Ernst von Hessen-Rheinfels. Quote 14, citing Antoine Arnauld as saying he finds it strange that so many millions of pagans have not been condemned, Leibniz comments, "I would find it much stranger if they were condemned. I don't know why we are so moved to believe people damned or plunged into eternal miseries, even when they could not help it. But that occasions thoughts that are hardly compatible with the goodness and justice of God." Section 4, punishment in the city of God. Leibniz's argument that a pure love of God above all things is intrinsically beatifying is not the whole story about his city of God. In that city, there are not only virtue and its rewards, but also crime and punishment. Recall that in the Principles of Nature and of Grace, Leibniz describes God's city as one in which there is no crime without punishment, no good deeds without proportionate reward. Historically, the most discussed aspect of Leibniz's treatment of punishment in the city of God is his attitude toward the doctrine of eternal punishment. Three things are clear about this. One is that in his writings, Leibniz repeatedly endorsed the doctrine and never rejected it. I take that as established by Lloyd Strickland in his meticulously documented and extremely illuminating recent paper, Leibniz on Eternal Punishment. A second thing that is clear is that one of the grounds of justification of punishment that Leibniz accepts is purely retributive. He holds that the justification of punishment can be grounded, quote 15, in a relation of fitness which satisfies not only the offended party, but also the wise who see it, as a beautiful piece of music or, again, a good piece of architecture satisfies cultured minds. The Theodicy does not support this retributivism with much argument, and the suggestion of cultured minds finding aesthetic satisfaction in the punishment of wrongdoers is hardly winsome. Considerations of retributive fitness do function, however, to limit the extent of justified punishment. They appear to motivate a third and most characteristic feature of Leibniz's views on eternal punishment. He holds that only those who go on sinning forever will be punished forever. Punishment is not eternal unless sin is also eternal, quote 16. This is Leibniz's reply to the exception that there is a disproportion between an eternal punishment and a limited crime. He declines to argue that a finite creature could commit a sin that is infinite because it offends an infinite God. For, he says, it is enough to say that the duration of the fault caused the duration of the punishment. Even if we conceded that no sin is infinite in itself, nonetheless, it can certainly be said that the sins of the damned are infinite in number, since they persist in sinning through all eternity. On this view, there is never a time at which anyone has been sentenced to eternal punishment for sins already committed. The lost souls are always able to be set free, but they never will it, as Leibniz puts it in one of his earliest writings on this subject, the Confession of a Philosopher. In Leibniz's City of God, there is no gate with a sign on it saying, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." The thesis that never-ending punishment, if just, must be based on never-ending sin drew profoundly interesting comment in the early 1770s in an interchange between two of Leibniz's most influential fans, Johann August Eberhard and Gottfried Ephraim Lessing. Eberhard, remembered now chiefly as a Leibnizian critic of Kant, Lessing remembered for many things. One of the most illuminating comments is a consequence that Eberhard draws from the view that the only way in which the punishment of a finite individual can justly be infinite is by being infinite in duration and thus extensively infinite. Eberhard points out that such a view does not provide for a punishment that is intensively infinite, that is, for example, infinitely painful at a single time. Taken together, the arguments of Eberhard and Lessing suggest a view of eternal punishment much milder than traditional visions of fire and brimstone. Lessing explicitly denies that physical torture is an ingredient in divinely ordained punishment after death. Only natural psychological consequences of sin are to be part of that. To what extent would Leibniz accept this softening of the conception of punishment after death? What is his view of the nature or quality, and specifically the intensity of punishments in the City of God? Reflection on points made by Eberhard and Lessing suggests that for issues of theodicy, this question is at least as important as the question of duration of punishments. Particularly important, I believe, is the question whether any intelligent creature's existence will be so unhappy, so miserable in the end and on the whole, that it would be preferable for that creature if it had never existed. At least at first glance, one might think that a negative answer to this question would be more propitious for vindication of the wise Creator's charity. And Leibniz does sometimes employ an argument that seems to presuppose that every intelligent creature will have an existence at least marginally worth having. The need for this presupposition is perhaps clearest in a fragment of dialogue that may have been written about 1690, which I quote in quote 17. In it, Leibniz imagines his interlocutor bringing up the theological problem of evil in the mode of personal complaint and asking